Support for this podcast comes from Goldman Sachs. What do Goldman Sachs experts and leading thinkers have to say about trends shaping markets, industries, and the global economy? Stay informed with the latest insights from Goldman Sachs on the economic and market implications of COVID-19. Available on our podcasts at gs.com/COVID-19 or any of your favorite podcast platforms.
Empire. Wearable technology is trying to become ubiquitous.
What attracted me to Catapult was that actually the industry itself was still pretty nascent. When you think of, sort of technology being used to pull data out of athletic performance.
That's Will Lopes, CEO of Catapult, who believes one day wearable technology will be an annual stocking stuffer. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. Wearable technology is no longer something that falls into the category of device used by the select few, and for that reason, Will Lopes, whose recent executive background was in the growing audiobook industry at Amazon's Audible, believes the surface is being scratched on how people will interact with and what the growth trajectory looks like for his company and others like it. Our guest this week is the CEO of Catapult, Will Lopes. As the company specializes in wearable technology, video analysis, they work in athlete management and content licensing as well. And this is the first year that Will has been in charge of this company, and what a year to change jobs and change positions. Hi, Will. How are you?
Good. Yes, it has been a year.
I want to get into your background a little bit, but I want to talk about Catapult as well. But just as far as 2020 goes, how have you kind of navigated your new position this first year dealing with COVID?
Yeah, it's been an interesting year to navigate. I think, I've been here just a tad over a year now. And the first 3 months for me was kind of learning about the company, learning about sports and the technology that we provide. But then right after that, we hit March and the world of sports all shut down at almost, it's at the same exact time. And so it was really about, figuring out, how do we support our clients in this stage? How do we keep the company, going? And quite honestly, I think it's been a year where we've had to adapt quite a bit of the technology we offer, either, offering things like contact tracing and different forms to kind of, check in with the athletes, offer work from home solutions to our clients, but as well as, managing the company in a virtual sense, which, I would say that, in sports in many ways, it's also a very client-driven business. And not being able to see people face to face has been a bit of a challenge. I think, lucky for us, Catapult has a long established history in the industry. And so, I think we've been very lucky that our clients continue to support us and believe in our products. But it's been a challenge for sure.
So, you work with thousands of teams. Obviously, this affected everybody similarly and differently, I guess, dependent on where you are around the globe. When they came to you and said, this is what we need right now, what were you hearing from them that they needed this year?
Yeah, it's. I think it was really around three elements, right? It was, can you help us record, the athletes, feeling or rather, health in terms of a COVID situation, right? So, the standard sort of, did you have a fever? How are you feeling today, et cetera? So we immediately got requests for that. Second, on the league. So, for example, particularly on European soccer, a lot of it was, can you help us figure out how to do training sessions in a way that we're still socially distanced, right? And so, our wearables technology allows for the transponders to kind of know exactly how far athletes are from each other. And they needed to produce reports that they could go back to the league's office and say, look, we're following our guidelines. So immediately we had to kind of modify technology for that. And then the third bucket was really, help me do some of the stuff that I would do in the office, i.e. the training center, help me do that at home now, right? And so can I do high def video at home? Can I, do the same telestration? Can I actually manage health, monitoring for our athletes when they're home? So we did a number of things related to, video workflows from home, helping, trainers actually see the health, sort of status of athletes, being able to kind of use wearables at home. So it's all been around, sort of help me around those three elements. And we were, I think we were fortunate that we have a pretty large and very good tech team that was able to kind of modify a lot of this and get things going very quickly.
So maybe this is hard to answer this now, but obviously there are unintended consequences of many forms based on what's happened here to the sports world. Do you see much of the stuff that you just talked about as a blip that we get over it and the world gets back to normal? Or are there things that you could see shifting what you all do and how the sports world interacts with one another in perpetuity based on the changes that had to be made due to the pandemic?
Yeah, I think there will be some shifts here that I think will be permanent, right? I think the shift of being able to do a lot more at home, I think is actually, is something that will be permanent in the world of sports. And whether that's, getting athletes to, study plays, getting athletes to, pay it, sort of understand more of their health journey at home, getting trainers to review video at home. I think that's going to be here for quite some time. I think the other component that may shift, and this one is hard to tell, but I think will actually have an impact as well, is that I would say if you go pre-pandemic, the acceptance of having conversations about onboarding a new trainer, teaching how to use different parts of our platform. Was all anticipated that people were always doing it in person. And I think there's going to be an acceptance that some of this now is done virtually, right? I think there is a change on that front. Beyond those two things, I think it doesn't impact us just yet, but I think, it will be interesting to see how it impacts the industry overall, is the impact on fan engagement. Yeah. I think there's been a lot of, thought processing that's gone in for the last, 6 months of how do you keep fans excited about, live sports if they can't attend the event itself. And some of that has been happening already over time as things have becoming, more digital in the media sense. But I think, you're seeing, you saw what, the NBA did with their bubble. And I think some of those things may surface up, and the need for data to create more fan engagement over time may actually, play out for, at least for Catapult's purpose, on the positive side.
So explain that to me, because clearly you guys are known mainly for wearable technology. Could you tell me a little bit how that would play into the strength of Catapult?
Yeah, so I think our wearables technology is measuring hundreds of data points, right, and using algorithms to kind of help the trainers today figure out how to keep the player healthy and safe, and avoid injuries and so on. But that data could also be used to enhance broadcasting, right? And so you could say, well, what is the exertion level of an athlete in this play, right? And so one, for example, one of the algorithms we have is to actually look at the strength of the impact between linemen in American football. That could easily be turned into something that could be used for broadcasting to get fans to feel a bit closer to the action. And so I think, as we've had conversations with leagues at this stage, that opening of how do I use data to get fans to really understand what's happening on the field is something that I think may change. And some of that was happening already with computer vision. But I think, there are some gaps that computer vision can't quite close yet. that our wearables data probably could.
Let's talk just broadly about the sports performance industry and how you maybe saw the future of it before all this started to happen, and if any of that has changed through here over the last 12 months.
And not really. I would say that, from when you think of the sports performance industry overall, what attracted me to Catapult was that actually the industry itself was still pretty nascent. When you think of, sort of technology being used to pull data out of athletic performance, so far, a lot of it is single purpose, right? Meaning, I may have a technology to understand training sessions. I may have a technology to understand, hydration. I may have technology to understand, scouting, techniques and coaching and so on. What was still missing in this industry overall is that, we still need to create more of a cohesive view of technology. If you talk to a lot of the coaching staff today, one of the themes that you hear quite often is, I have access to so much data today that I'm spending more and more time deciphering this than I am on coaching. And I think that need has not changed. I think that isn't going away at all. The second thing I think I always point out to folks is that demand for sports didn't change during this pandemic. It's probably, as a matter of fact, it's probably pent up, right? What's changed is the ability to play live and make sure that the players and the coaching staff stay healthy. So I think once the pandemic comes sort of behind us, the need to kind of have that cohesive view, continue to improve the performance of athletes because the demand from a viewership is still there, is really going to be an important component for it.
I want to talk about your background for a moment. Were you a big sports fan?
I would say I was a casual sports fan. I'm Brazilian. So it's soccer for us is the most important thing, right? World Cup comes around and it's almost like religion in our household. I grew up watching sports during a fantastic era where you had all of these amazing superstars in basketball and football and so on. So I was a casual fan. I wouldn't say I knew the world of elite sports, very well. But the more I discovered what we were doing, and the more I understood what was happening in the industry, I became really smitten by the intellectual challenge that is about how do you take data and actually improve physiological behaviors. And that's not an easy thing to do. And to really start to understand also, how the acceptance of data and technology was being changed within sports technology, the sports industry overall was fascinating to me. I didn't realize, for example, that, you had all of these PhDs now basically in the training centers who are really focused on, the physical aspect of the athlete. How do you keep them safe? How do you avoid, injuries of soft tissues and so on? And the amount of technology that was going on there, I think to me was really, really interesting. And so for my background, I spent, 20 years on sort of a consumer technology business. There was elements of it that I think were easy to apply here. Right. And so, the idea of being customer obsessed, which is, you're thought of that at Amazon very quickly, but really focusing here on what does that customer obsession mean from a team, from an athlete perspective? Then two is, how do you, we're at the end of the day, we're a subscription business. And so how do you continue to improve this platform so that you're adding more and more value to the athletes and to the teams? Was really, really interesting to me. And then three, like I said, the intellectual challenge from a technology perspective. How do you build an engineering team who's really looking at that cohesive view, right? So, it's one thing to just look at a training session from a wearables perspective. It's another when you start to combine video and the wearables. Yeah. And then, and then we imagine a world where, if you start to connect the data points around, sleep pattern and hydration and nutrition and so on, it really starts to create a very different point of view of, how the athlete's journey is coming along.
Support for this podcast comes from AT&T. 5G from AT&T is fast, reliable, secure, and nationwide. So, should you switch? Well, historically, those were the reasons new tech was adopted. Neanderthals saw that fire heated things fast and made their caves secure from rampaging woolly mammoths. The ancient Romans saw that the aqueducts were a reliable and fast way to transport water, so they stopped carrying water jugs on their backs and adopted them nationwide. Oh, and 1800s Victorians saw electricity light up rooms fast and be more reliable than candles blowing out, so they stopped bumping into walls and made it nationwide. Today's no different. Switching to AT&T 5G is kind of a no-brainer. I mean, historically speaking, it's smarter than candles, water pots, and hungry dinosaurs. AT&T 5G, it's not complicated. 5G requires compatible plan, may not be in your area. See att.com/5G for you for details.
You had mentioned Amazon. It's Audible that you were at, which, frankly, I'm a customer of. I downloaded a book last night. Can you kind of take me through what you learned in the experience of working with the customer in audio products like that transfers over to what you're doing with Catapult?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things, right? I think primarily the first thing I think you realize that at Audible, being a subscription business, your need to always be innovating on behalf of the customer. Because, there's always a competitor around the corner. And how do you continue to improve that and actually, stay connected to the customer while you're doing it, was a great principle to learn at Audible and Amazon. Two is to really think about scale, right? And particularly from a technology perspective. And one of the challenges that you find in the sports tech industry overall is that a lot of the times the technology is designed for very regional or sport specific purpose, but it lacks sort of a scale component to it. And so you might have a technology that works, very well for, hockey in America, but you can't transfer the technology to, soccer in Europe or American football here. And so how do you think about that overall from a scale perspective? I think that has been one of the things that, I brought with me. And then, I would say the third component is also, I spend, a good part of my career there helping expand globally. And what you start to realize is that, there are nuances and regional needs, both from a customer, but also from your employee base. And so how do you continue to innovate on behalf of your customer, but do so in a way that's meaningful locally? And so the example I always use here is that, we had a management solution at Catapult when I got here that was kind of a one size fits all for everybody across the globe. But what you start to realize very quickly is that, how a team in the EPL manages their roster is entirely different than the team that manages their roster in the NFL and the NCAA, for example. And so you need to think globally, you need to kind of think about scale, but then you also need to make sure that, it fits into the right market. And a good example for that for me at Audible was that, when we launched our service in Australia, we actually did it out of the UK for the first year, and it was a disaster. And what we really needed to do was have, regional local people to understand the market, understand the merchandising, understand the language that really needed to kind of, be expressed on what we did. And I think here is very similar to that. We can't just take, what we're doing in NCAA for football and say, well, let's just do that for rugby in Australia, for example. There's a level of regionalization that needs to happen.
So let me leave you with the idea of scale then for you. And obviously there are all these different teams and leagues and sports that you're dealing with around the globe, but there is a limit to how many there are. Are you looking at youth sports as the scale model for Catapult to try to incorporate all the things that you're doing on that level?
Yeah, I think the long-term, future for Catapult is not only servicing the professional, sports world, which is about 15,000 teams across the globe, but across, all the different sports. But it's also, how do you take the complicated set of data that we're collecting and the algorithms we're building for, these very sophisticated teams with, typically 20, 30 staff members trying to improve performance. But over time, how do you simplify that down to what we call prosumer teams, right? So youth academies, high schools, semi-pros. Because a lot of them won't have a staff of 30. They might have a staff of, maybe 1 or 2 or 3. And so how do you help them make better decisions, particularly on the health and safety of athletes, which is an important topic regardless of the age group. And so how do you simplify that down to the prosumer level teams? And then how do you actually simplify that for the consumer level as well? How do you get a youth individual who, has the ambition to become a professional athlete or maybe just play in university, become a better athlete, but do so safely.
Will Lopes is the CEO at Catapult. Thank you so much for joining us, Will.
Brian, thank you for having me on your podcast. I appreciate it.
On the next Future Sport podcast, Jim Heather, CEO of HyperIce, couldn't agree more with the growth strategies of companies like his that focus on movement and recovery.
In your car, you have a check engine light, you have a gas light, you have an oil light, all these different elements that give you indications about what's happening in your car. We don't really have that on the human body. So there's a whole level of discovery that's going to be happening over the next, 5, 10, 20 years.
That will do it for this episode. As always, the future is now. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. The Future Sport Podcast is brought to you by 3 Advance, developers of sports tech apps that are AI-powered and UX-focused. So if you're looking to create some apps for your startup or your sports biz calls for some artificial or business intelligence, you should check out 3 Advance. They're incredible. Go to 3advance.com. That's the number 3advance.com.